Back on the Ken Sterling Show, CBS Sports 1430 with the Hickory Huskers. No, you guys keep going. Wade Shank, who we're going to hear from a little bit later in the show, and Brad Long from Center Grove, who played Buddy, Steve Holler from Warsaw, now a dentist, who played Raid, David Nydorf, your Everett Flatch, as you well know, and Morris Valanis, who's Jimmy Chitwood, and you guys are back together for to be honored tonight. It's the 30th anniversary, and so the Pacers have brought you guys together, and you guys are going to be at Bankers Life Fieldhouse for the game tonight against the Suns. Morris, what's this like? Kind of, it seems like you guys have such an easy relationship together and get along so well even 30 years later.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, we did something 30 years ago for 10 or 12 weeks, and ever since then, every time we get together, it's like we're brothers, and just saw each other the other day. So it's always good to see them and get together.
And they got you guys together, right? You guys, I was talking to Wade earlier. They got you guys together for a month or so to practice and get to know each other and kind of build some kind of camaraderie, right, David?
Yeah, I think it was 2 weeks, if I remember. And I think the first guy who was going to run those practices was Tom Abernathy. And I just remember going to this big mansion. I think he was ex-NBA player. And then he soon quit, and we got into it every day with strats, right? So it was a lot of practice every day, and we bonded right away. Wade was my roommate, and that was quite an interesting experience.
Steve, the movie 30 Years Later still resonates, and you guys are still beloved. And the thing, I was telling this to Wade too, is that looking at you guys, and I saw some of you guys they had a 10th anniversary deal down at the Circle Center Mall, and so they had a screening, and I saw some of you guys, and it was weird. I thought, man, they haven't changed. That was like back in 1951, and then you realize that the movie was really 86, and you guys shouldn't be in your 80s. You guys are in probably early 50s, I'm guessing, and but still in people's minds, that movie was reality.
Well, I think it was, and 30 years later seems a little strange to all of us, but your first question was right. I mean, over those 30 years, all of us, thanks to the media and thanks to people like the Pacers, we've been able to be in the Milan Museum. We've been able to be brought together, and it's been fun, I think, as a team, because we still are a team, and it's awesome. These guys are brothers, and it is so amazing. My wife says all the time, it was such a short time period that we were together, but you can't ever separate that, and we really are. I mean, all of us miss Kent to this day. Yeah. We really do, and it's a deep wound for all of us to not have him here. But the 30 years is great, and I know everybody could touch on it a little bit, the variances of what 30 years means to them.
I just wanted to say something. Like, I did not participate because I lived farther away. So for me, it was the first time coming back a couple of weeks ago after 30 years, and I stayed out with Wade, and it was just like, no time had passed by. We immediately fell into our rhythm of joking with each other, making fun of each other. And so it was really special. I have to say, I didn't know what to expect. I hadn't seen Wade in 30 years or any of the guys, and it's very easy. It's very comfortable. It feels like a band of brothers.
They look roughly the same. I mean, I would know you guys. I would know you were Ollie, and I would know you were Jimmy, and you guys are a little shed of some hair. But other than that,
well, I think that Jimmy looks pretty much exactly the same, and Wade and Steve, Brad and I look a little bit different. I think, I don't get recognized quite as much, but yeah, I mean, they all look the same to me, and they act the same, and it just takes me back to that time 30 years ago when I was just like this kid from California, and I walked into this world of Indiana basketball that I just didn't have any idea really what it was about. And it was like walking into a hurricane. in terms of like what it really meant to everybody back here. And so it was a great experience. It impacted me, and to come back and reconnect with these guys just feels great. So I'm grateful for the Pacers for bringing us all back.
Let me ask.
A little bit.
Sure.
When he came in, and from the outside, he's from L.A., big L.A. actor, but when he came in, it was like he lived here all his life. I mean, it really was. It was like he wasn't an actor. Of course, this is his first film, but it was weird. It was weird. The casting did a heck of a job casting each one of us, because each one of us were our character. I mean, I was anyways, because they picked on me all the time. But other than that, and to speak on, when he came out and stayed with me here about a month ago, and he stayed at my house, and I chained him down in the basement, but somehow he got out. So I got new padlocks, but he won't stay with me now. I didn't want him roaming the streets of Ladoga. My God, he'd end up dead or out in a cornfield somewhere, lost.
It is a credit to the casting, right? And that's probably David and Angelo, that you guys fit together, and that 30 years hence you guys still fit together. Brad, talk about how you got cast. And at what point did you have any idea? Did you know that you guys were going to fit this well together?
I don't think you ever know for sure going into something like that. I will say that, because we were young men that had all shared a love of basketball, we all had that in common. And, to me, it's just like old college roommates. I mean, you can go years without seeing them, but when you do, you pick up right where you left off. And, in defense of David, if he felt like an outsider, I agree with Wade. He wasn't a prima donna, said, I've done this, I know what I'm doing, show my lines, get out of my way. And he came in and said, I want to learn. And we went to practices, we scrimmaged with each other, joked around. We did all kinds of hijinks. Some we can mention, some we can't. But that age lends itself to that situation. And I tell you, as much as I remember the filming and what the movies meant, some of my best memories are some of the things we've been talking about. Some of the things that we did, and you never lose that, and it's always going to be part of us. I mean, we're going to be at some point 74 years old, 20, 30, 25 years from now, talking about probably the same stuff and having as much fun then.
I think the one piece that they got right with the Hickory players is the individual pieces of all of us, because it's a team, but we are also very, very different, not only in how we look, but our personality, but how we acted on the floor. For instance, Ollie is so different than Jimmy. Jimmy is so different from Everett, and Buddy and Raid, we had, and Whit, all the way down the line. That's why people can we weren't in the movie that much, and our character development wasn't that grand, but they did a great job of individualistically casting us, that we were able to develop our own character that way.
Morris, you played Jimmy, and to this day, anytime anybody sees a great shooter, whether it's in the NBA, college basketball, high school basketball, whatever, say, oh, he's got a Jimmy Chitwood stroke. That's you. It's a fictional character, but you're like the Jerry West is the logo for the NBA, but for shooting, it's like Jimmy Chitwood.
Wow, that's a lot of pressure. No, you know what? Growing up, I loved Rick Mount, loved Jerry West, all the great shooters. It just kind of, I guess I never got taught. I just tried to emulate that and copy what they did, and kind of got lucky, I guess.
And Rick Mount's an interesting parallel, guy from Lebanon, Indiana, probably the greatest shooter of all time. And what did you – because you didn't say much in the movie. But, like, coach stays, I play. Coach goes, I go. People cry.
Again, that's Angelo's writing and the script. I just did what they told me.
Let me speak to that. I think he something that encapsulates that is the old saying is speak softly and carry a big stick. And that encapsulates him, because he is quiet. He's not a prima donna, very humble. But get him on a court and watch him shoot and look out. And he had the look. He had the textbook shot. The elbow was in, the follow through. And I think it's amazing, Morris, truthfully, as we talk about this, that you never really had any training. That you just, it sounds like just you watched people and learn, and you can learn a lot by watching. You know, if you watch great.
That's real. That's not fake. Yeah. Okay. He came out to L.A. too, you know, to try to further his acting career, and we played pickup ball on the Y, and that's absolutely real. The guy can flat out shoot. So I think that that's what translates into the movie. Like you see some other sports movies, and you know they're like you said, it's going to be a cutaway. Right. It just doesn't feel right.
The thing about it,
okay,
you've never seen him play defense. You know what I mean? The movie or otherwise.
Wade, we all know that. It's still true today.
So the scene when you're on the dirt shooting buckets and Gene Hackman's talking to you, all you got to do is shoot. You're acting because you're in the scene, but he's kind of doing the acting. And there was, so I talked to Wade about this a little bit earlier. Gene Hackman, great actor, and you guys, minus you, David, no professional acting experience at all. What was it like? What do you think it was like for him to work with guys that had never acted?
Well, he was actually very respectful of us. I mean, he actually gave us acting lessons before we started filming. So in that way, we got to see, in a sense, what he was like when we were acting with him, which helped a lot.
And so with him as your basketball coach, he kind of served in that role as an actor as well.
Yeah, I mean, I for me personally, I was a little intimidated by Gene. So that's how you might have treated your coach back then. I think coaches back then were probably intimidating figures. So for me, it felt natural to have a kind of remove. You know, like Gene was stern. He was a stern guy, at least from my perspective. You know, the other guys might have different experiences. I did not joke around with Gene. I know that Brad will tell you a story.
We got in trouble, but yeah, some of us can't deliver that line. But I will say this: you mentioned it, and I never really thought about it until you asked that question about whether or not Gene would have preferred seasoned actors or nobodies that had played some basketball. And as I reflect on that, I think back that when Gene came in, and here's a guy had been Popeye Doyle, had been Lex Luthor, had Bonnie. I mean, go down the list of his resume. Could have been a real prima donna. Could have come in and said, "Get out of my way, show me my spots, and give me my lines." Instead, I don't know if you guys remember this, he wanted to go to some high school practices, and we did. We went to a couple high school practices. He wanted to see how the coaches acted, the verbiage that they use, and I always was impressed by that. I thought, here's a guy that is not saying I know what I'm doing. He said, I want to learn. And I think Gene did learn little things about how he would say block him out or cut him off the baseline. I don't know that he would have known to say those things because a lot of that wasn't necessarily scripted. It was just coach speak. And I think he picked a lot of that up off of the practices. So I always admired that about Gene, that he didn't come in real prima donna-ish and said, I know what I'm doing. He really didn't do that. He was there to learn,
But he was even in the non-action camera rolling times, he really, he was 50-ish at the time, and he really carried the persona. And I always called him Coach at the time, or I called him Mr. Hackman. I never once referred to him as Gene. Yeah. It was Mr. Hackman or Coach.
Him Gino.
Big G. Hey, G Money. You go G Money.
But Steve, you mentioned something there. It just struck me. Gene basically was the age we are now. Yeah. If you guys think about that. Have you thought about that?
I have.
Gene was 54. I'm 54. I think Gene was 54. We're all right there. So think about the age we are now is what Gene was when we filmed Hoosiers.
Well, Ollie and I aren't that old. Sorry, Brad. But I think the other thing is I don't know about Mars. I'd be interested, and David doesn't feel that way with being really, David came into this from L.A., an actor, and got his job, and this was his first big break, and he went on to do many other acting experiences. For me, I was playing basketball, which is what I love to do. I was playing basketball, and the acting the acting just kind of happened as a result of me being a basketball player. So, Brad talks about Mr. Hackman, about him, honing his trade and learning how to be a basketball coach, because this is what he was doing in this film. For me, it was about playing basketball, and I think a lot of the guys would say that to a piece.
Perfect. We'll be back with more from the cast of Hoosiers, the Hickory Huskers, after this. Kent Sterling Show continues. CBS Sports 1430. Back on the Kent Sterling Show, CBS Sports 1430. CBS Sport with the cast of Hoosiers, the Hickory Huskers. We've got Morris Valanis, David, Steve, Brad, and Ollie. Of course, Wade. Wade Skank.
Speaking of the Ollie thing, and even whenever I get back with you guys first thing you go, hey Ollie, and you remember we all when we were in a room together throughout the film, we called each other by our character name.
Did we do that on purpose, or did they tell us to do that?
Well, we kind of got together and said, man, we're going to stay in character.
Well, the funny thing is, Mr.
That sounds
Hackman,
like a Kent thing.
Mr. Hackman did not know our names. Yeah. I promise you, he didn't know our names.
Yeah.
And the one scene that the listeners will love is the scene in Hinkle Fieldhouse, the blackboard scene, and they have a set director in there. And I'm going to tell you how this shook out in real life. The set director comes and he had put just names up on that board that were the opposing team. And I went to the set director ahead of time, and I had the idea, hey, why don't we put our real last names? Put Long, Brad Long. Put Holler down there. And
because Brad Boyle and I were talking about this, and Boyle says I came up with the idea, and that's why his name was first and mine was second.
That's funny because I thought Hackman came up with this idea. I'm learning something here.
Well, obviously,
Boyle's name was first, and he got mentioned. Their best player was Boyle.
well, let me tell you the rest of the story the way it really happened.
Tell us, Paul Harvey.
Clearly, they're having a little trouble with 30 years. But I went to the assistant director and said, hey, can we put our real last name? He said, no. He blew us off. So I went to David Anspaugh. He blew us off because they didn't want to change it because I'm telling you the way it shook down. They took Polaroid pictures of the sets, and they wanted everything exactly the same. I went to Mr. Hackman and said, this is the idea. It might have been Brad's idea, but Mr. Hackman went up there and erased it, and they were freaking out.
I remember
he
that.
erased it.
I do remember that.
And he turns to us, and this is why I know he didn't
What
know
are
it.
your names?
He said, shout out your last names. And the writing on that chalkboard is Gene Hackman's
You're right.
writing.
Steve is right on that.
I can't believe you remember that. That's a good memory. I know that it's a trivia question now. If you talk to people, people will say to me, how did you guys get your name out there? And the story I've been telling now for 30 years, and I've had it wrong, is that it was Gene's idea. And he said that this won't seem like a big deal now, but years from now, it'll be like a trivia question. And it has become that. People will say that.
But why did Brad Boyle go on the top? I remember that.
I know he did. Because
We were said something. I think Brad was kind of a little bit of a prankster himself, but a little bit under the radar. And I think when Gene was saying call out your names, Brad probably shouted out his name first.
That's correct. But Hackman moved to the board because I went to him and said, this is, we can debate for 30 years whose idea it was. But the reality was, and what people don't know, is that is Hackman's writing, and that obviously are our last names. Now, whose name didn't get on the board? Is yours up there?
Mine's on there.
David's is up
Mine's
there?
dead last.
Yours is on there. Is yours on there, Brad?
Mine's on there. Is Summers on there? I'm not sure Summers is on.
Might not be
I don't
on
think
there.
it is. To tell you the truth, it's not.
And Scott played Strap, and he clearly is the quiet one of the
But
bunch.
Wade, I'm telling you, I now remember like Gene erasing the names
Absolutely.
and asking, "What's your name? What's your name?"
And spell it.
Yeah.
Spell it.
Gene, I've been working with you for 10 weeks.
I think in my case, he just called me legs. That's what I did to him.
Let me ask you, David. Let me ask you about Dennis Hopper, because you had great scenes with Dennis Hopper, and that's really kind of to me, the spine of the movie is sort of his relationship with you and his dealing with alcoholism and going to the sanitarium, and the scene between you and Dennis in the sanitarium was just so touching and but not acty. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so I was telling the boys, I don't know if I had told them before, I hadn't seen them, but that was like the fourth take. And the first take, I think I did a lot of crying, a lot of tears. And to David's credit, I think, I was all cried out. So I thought, I was so good in that first take, man. I really cried up a storm. and
is the way it came off in the fourth one.
So
it was on the edge of it, which I think is more effective than anything else.
So, when I saw it, I was a little bit shocked because I was expecting, it's going to be so great. I'm going to cry, and everybody's going to cry, and it's going to be so great. And then when I saw it, I thought it was even better. I thought the choice, the emotion was understated. To let the audience feel what they want to feel about it rather than me, impose with all crime. But Dennis was very easy to work with. The first time we all saw him, or the first time that I saw him, was when he came out in the semifinal game or the quarterfinal game when he was drunk and he staggered out onto the court. I had never even been introduced to him. I had just heard a whisper he's here. He's Dennis Hopper is finally here. And then he staggered out onto the court, and we were all out on the court playing, and it was kind of like a shock to me that he was there.
Perfectly for that scene because you got upset in that scene.
That makes sense, because those were the first scenes we shot, were the sectional scenes.
I'm starting to think David had a higher agenda than we even imagined because of all the things he did, the little kind of things he not introducing him to Dennis and all that kind of stuff.
I definitely was not introduced to Dennis at all, but he was very easy to work with. The boys have their own experience with Gene. I was always just a little bit back on my heels, a little bit intimidated. And the only time I ever relaxed was in the diner scene, because it was at the end of the day. It was one of those scenes where they're probably going to cut it, or they might cut it.
In Nineveh or in New Richmond?
Yeah, and they were doing that day for night, so it was the middle of the night, but they shine it with bright lights. So when you see that scene, it looks like it's in the day. We're all tired. It's a 14-hour day, and so I did it simple because I was dead tired. And Gene came up and goes, "Hey, that was nice. It was simple." And that was my only real interaction with Gene where I felt relaxed a little bit, to be honest with you.
When that's the weird thing. I was watching an interview with Billy Bob Thornton because he's got Bad Santa coming out, and so he quoted Robert Duvall saying, "Subtle is great, but there is a small difference between subtle and boring." And for guys who've never acted, you tend to kind of be overt. You tend to overact, but you guys didn't. You guys are just guys playing basketball and treated him with respect, and it resonates as true always, and that's like the magic of the movie to me.
That's a nice compliment, but I have to confess to you, I've said this for years, and I'll stick by it. And maybe not. I can't speak for David because David actually had done some acting. He kind of knew things we didn't know, But I will tell you that, to me, if the movie would have been about bowling or ping pong, I might have been in trouble. But because I had played high school and college basketball, we would have media days in college. The press would come out, we'd answer questions, scrimmage, answer. To me, that's what it seemed like. So it wasn't that big of a departure for me. And so I didn't think much about it. And truthfully, I'll confess here, they didn't give us too many lines. So we couldn't really screw it up and maybe see how inept we were. In my case, I'm speaking for myself now. They were careful maybe about that. So, I'm sure there was a method to their madness with how they did the lines.
I would disagree. I tried like heck to overact, but it fit my character, Ray Butcher, of the brash and outspoken. So I was not that. I was probably over the top.
Well, and that's what said, the beauty of it, that we all looked at it differently maybe.
But I think that, my memory watching you and feeling the same thing for myself is we got a lot more confident as the movie went along. And part of it, when you make a movie, there's a lot of sitting around, actually. There's a lot of doing nothing. And you get bored. And all of a sudden, it's not that big of a deal. The whole circus of making a movie with camera and lights and 50 people running around. So you just kind of, it's in the movie business, it's sink or swim. You can either cut it when the camera turns on or you can't. If you can't, they're going to fire you. And these guys, and I felt it for myself as well, got more confident as it went along because it wasn't that big of a deal,
but then they
right?
couldn't cut us out either because we already had scenes. So we knew when we go get, they're going to send us on our way packing because they didn't have the money to bring somebody else in and reshoot all the scenes.
I had a conversation with David about that, about you.
Because the crew coming from L.A. or whatever, and that was their job. That was their livelihood. Us, we really didn't care because after it was done, we was either going to go back farming or he was going to sell rings or he was going to go to dental school or whatever Morris did. I don't know.
I actually went out to California for a little while.
But you remember this guy, was his name Richard or Mickey or something like that? He'd come bang on our door because we all had an RV together, you remember? And we got used to it so much of going out standing around. We'd go and sit and stand there for 2 hours. And finally, we'd just say, okay, we'll be in here in a second. And then about 10 minutes later, he'd come banging on the door. Guys, need you on the set. Okay, we'll be right there. And it would go on for hours. And he'd get so spastic and, like, if I don't have him out there, I'm going to get fired. But we just didn't care. Like I said, after we were done, we were going back to our own lives.
Ignorance is bliss.
Yes.
One of the great scenes, and Ray Butcher, my part didn't have anything to do with this scenes, but I really admired all of them that were part of the picket fence scene with Dennis Hopper. That is a great scene because as that developed, to your point, it was well into the filming, and that picket fence scene, and one of our fallen comrades, Kent Poole, it's a great scene for Kent, and as that developed, and then. Who was it? You, buddy, that talked to Dennis Hopper as you went off the court then in that picket fence scene?
I remember saying, "Good job."
That was improv. Was that you, Brad?
I did say something to him.
You said you made it. You did
yeah,
it.
but think about it. We all did it at one point in filming. We all took, for lack of a better word, a little bit of liberties just in the moment. You think, what would I do in a game? To me, it's just I'd rather ask for forgiveness and permission. And sometimes you would just do or say things that you would normally do in a game. And in that case, I think I did say something. That's what I would have done. And so, and they'd tell you if they didn't like it. And,
the pearls David mentioned earlier, and I've learned so much. It's been fun to be back with David Neidorf today because he's taught me a lot of things that, we've heard these stories again and again and we don't remember them. But at some point in the filming, I remember Mr. Hackman telling me, he says, now, if there's an uptake and you're talking to Buddy or I'm talking to Ollie and my mouth's moving and they don't have me mic'd up, he says, they're going to have to loop it in and you're going to be in it one way or the other. So my mouth was moving a lot during that movie.
You just want to make sure it's not like Godzilla, a Japanese movie where your mouth's moving. Godzilla.
Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. Raid and Brad, Steve, David, Morris, what an absolute treat. You guys are, I know you guys just spent a few weeks doing this, back in 1986, but you're like basketball royalty. And in Indiana, you guys are the thing. People, you can't go to a high school basketball game without hearing somebody say, run the picket fence on them, and stuff like that. The vernacular of basketball was inexorably and forever changed by the work you guys did 30 years ago. Have fun tonight. I really appreciate it.
Don't get caught watching the paint dry.